Welcome to Alternate Readings. My channel's aim is to get listeners to reflect on books and films in ways they may not have previously considered. When applicable to my analysis, I'll draw connections to current events and my experiences with works I've taught, read, or both. Instead of sound bites, summaries, or so-called hacks, I like to entice people to slow down and pose reflective questions about the discussed works so that they may develop interpretations of their own. The texts of my posts are available on alternatereadings.substack.com. I play the music and do the artwork as well. Please like and subscribe, and thanks for listening. Episode 3, The Catcher in the Rye, a masterpiece of misunderstandings. Having taught Salinger's classic for 30 years, I learned long ago that The Catcher in the Rye is by no means a simple book. All good literature flourishes with careful rereadings, and I'll be the first to admit that I soon learned to abandon the reductive sound bites associated with the novel. Even in the educational material intended for teachers, Holden is often reduced to a rebel, a loner, a hypersensitive nuisance in the throes of a coming-of-age story. Take your pick. But nothing could be further from the truth. After years of studying the novel with my classes, I began to notice that the book was never intended for young adults, as it is replete with nuances that are often beyond them, through no fault of their own, of course. Experience can't be taught. Now, before I proceed with my reading strategy for Catcher, let me just say that I explored all the common themes with my classes, including the significance of character names and the commonly addressed symbols, such as Holden's red hunting hat and his concern about the Central Park ducks. But I want to explore a different premise. Salinger chose the title for several reasons which have been handsomely developed by critics over the decades since the book's publication. There is Holden's desire to save children from the corruption of adulthood, his need to retain the purity of innocence, his idealism in a phony world, etc. But what is ignored is that, at its root, the title refers to a simple misunderstanding that nonetheless has tremendous ramifications. The famous passage that includes the title is on page 173, wherein Holden tells his sister Phoebe what he'd like to be, which is the Catcher in the Rye, a savior figure who prevents children from falling off the cliff. From there, people rightfully pursue some of the interpretations alluded to above, but they forget to mention a key subtlety. Phoebe clarifies for her brother, and her name means light, that it's if a body meet a body coming through the rye. It's a poem by Robert Burns. The implication is that it's not about saving people or catching them. It might be possible, though, to meet them, as in forming some valid connection with someone. Herein lies one of the most important keys to the novel. Just as Holden heard catch instead of meet, he often mishears, so to speak, or misapprehends the events of his life. If we use this idea to orient ourselves in our approach to the novel, employing it as a reading strategy to observe how he misunderstands his interactions with multiple characters, we will develop a great appreciation of Salinger's genius, which partly amounts to this. He has created a first-person, unreliable character who misapprehends life to some extent. Readers must consider Holden's storytelling, and then identify and reflect upon any experience he may have misconstrued. The reader, in effect, creates his own third-person narrator by reading between the lines. Moreover, unlike traditional, unreliable narrators who tend to be intentionally deceitful, Holden is innocent at heart. His misunderstandings are due to his passion for authenticity, his hatred of all things phony. This point is reinforced by the music played at the carousel scene at the end of the novel, when Holden watches Phoebe going round and round, literally rotating in a static moment of childhood innocence. The song playing is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by Jerome David Kern, which I will play at the end. A part of the lyric goes, when your heart's on fire, you must realize smoke gets in your eyes. Stick around for the ending. I'll play it on the piano for you. So Holden is partially blinded by his inexperience and passion. Now we have a sense of his tendency to misread his experiences, and this will serve as our reading strategy. Let's apply it, shall we? I'm only going to give 2 examples because I do not want to deprive you of the pleasure of discovering them for yourself when you engage with the text through this lens. There are many, and if you take into account that there are over 50 characters in the book, some merely mentioned within the space of a single paragraph, there is plenty of material for you to apply your observational skills. Here is the approach in the form of critical reading questions. For each of the character interactions or anecdotal references, ask yourself, 1. What is Holden precisely relating about himself and other characters? 2. What did he likely misunderstand or misrepresent about the situation, both to himself and readers? And 3. What can be concluded based on all available details? I've had excellent class discussions applying the above approach. After a good exchange, I'd often show students how superficial most of the so-called grade-saving sources online could be. I wanted them to appreciate how nuanced the novel could be if they were willing to abandon stereotypes and engage with it on a whole other level. So here goes. The first sample situation I've selected is his interaction with Mrs. Morrow, who sits next to him after boarding the empty train car, except for Holden, in Trenton. Holden's ultimate destination is New York City. The encounter with Mrs. Morrow occurs between pages 54 to 58. Holden prides himself in being in control of the conversation as he tells her nice things about her son, Ernest, confident that this is what she wants to hear. He's obviously attracted to her and tells readers that he likes her. Before flattering her with compliments about her son, he assures readers she had a lot of charm. She had quite a lot of sex appeal, too, if you want to know. His affinity for her makes him nervous, and though he thinks he's smarter than she is because he assumes he knows exactly what she wants to hear, alert readers should be asking if there is anything Holden misapprehends about the situation. Let's apply my strategy. When Holden decided to leave Pensy Prep, it was after his fight with Stradlater, who arrived back late from his date with Jane Gallagher. It was also after his brief exchange with Ackley. Then he had to pack and find transportation for his plan to take it easy for a few days in New York City. We know from the beginning of Chapter 8 that it was too late to call up for a cab or anything. This explains why the train car is empty. Now, Mrs. Morrow is a woman of means. Holden provides multiple clues in this regard. Then I watched her take off her gloves. Boy, was she lousy with rocks, he tells us, meaning she had several diamond rings. By the end of the chapter, we even learn that the Morrows own a beach home in Gloucester, Massachusetts, with its own tennis court. This raises several interesting questions. What is she doing in the middle of the night on a train to Newark? Wouldn't a person of her wealth and status wait until the morning to be driven back to her home instead of taking a train by herself? Why does she sit next to a stranger? Would a woman traveling alone do this at all? Don't people normally look for distance from others on public transportation, especially if there's plenty of room available? I'm aware that she noticed Holden's Pensy sticker on his suitcase, and this perhaps made her feel comfortable enough to sit next to him and start a conversation. But Holden was also bleeding from the nose, and Mrs. Morrow indicated this to him. Did she feel sorry for him and wanted to comfort him? Wouldn't his appearance make most people apprehensive to get involved? I don't claim to have the answers to these questions, but I hope that this proves to you that there are many social signals that he's missing. He offers Mrs. Morrow a cigarette on page 55, and she doesn't decline. Now, she already knows that Holden is her son's classmate. Wouldn't the adult thing to do be to discourage a young person from smoking, even in those days? But no. She plays along with his awkward flirtation, humoring him. Ironically, he's the one who thinks he has her eating out of his hand, but the situation may actually be reversed, or to phrase it as a question, who is hitting on whom here? Maybe she is merely enjoying the fact that he is attracted to her. In any event, Holden eventually asks her to join him for a drink on page 57, and she declines, but not snotty though, he insists. She gently handles his male ego by putting him in his place, but in such a way as to make him feel he is still in control of his flirtation, which she might also find amusing. Holden's conclusion is that mothers just want to hear how great their sons are, and there is some truth to that, obviously. But he may be missing all sorts of clues about Mrs. Morrow, like what she's doing traveling from Pennsylvania by herself at that hour. So he doesn't know what he doesn't know, and Salinger gives us an exquisite example of his innocence, one that tries to appropriate a sense of maturity before its rightful time. This is both comical and mysterious. My second example involves Jane Gallagher, a girl Holden idealizes from his early adolescence. He is clearly troubled that Stradlater went out on a date with her because he knows Stradlater has a reputation for taking advantage of girls. On page 31, in fact, he can't even get the name of his date correctly, referring to her as Jean instead of Jane until Holden corrects him. Holden thinks he knows a lot about her, insisting that he knows Jane like a book several times during his recollections of her. Additionally, his need to protect her from players like Stradlater recalls his ideal role as catcher, the savior of childhood innocence. In his mind, he senses a deep connection to Jane, one that exceeds mere physical attraction. He respects her as a friend and is mindful of several details about her life. But he doesn't really know her like a book. Let me focus on a fascinating comment that Holden makes about Jane. Another example of an easily missed misunderstanding on his part, too crucial to ignore, one that will serve as a window to what might really be happening. He recalls a game of checkers he had with Jane on page 78 and claims that it was the only time old Jane and I ever got close to necking even. The careful reader should note that this is one of his most egregious misrepresentations. There was nothing romantic about the scene. In fact, nothing even came close to so-called necking. Jane's stepfather comes out to the porch where Jane and Holden are playing their game, and he asks for cigarettes. Jane refuses to respond. He goes back inside, and Holden prompts her to tell him what is going on. Jane does not respond to him as well, and it is at this point that she begins to cry, rubbing the tear into the board with her finger. Seeing how upset his friend became after the momentary presence of her stepfather, Holden comforts her by kissing her all over her face, except for her mouth, he tells us. She wouldn't let him kiss her and only cried more intensely. The stepfather is referred to as a booze hound, and his name was Mr. Cudahy. A colleague of mine with whom I had plenty of discussions about the novel felt that his name literally sounds like could have he, as in, could have he done something to his stepdaughter. There's one more discomforting detail about this person from a prior point in the novel. Before Stradlater goes out on his date with Jane, Holden tells him on page 32 that Jane's stepfather was supposed to be a playwright or some goddamn thing, but all I ever saw him do was booze all the time and listen to every single goddamn mystery program on the radio, and run around the house naked with Jane around and all. If we combine this clue with the checker game, the conclusion is obvious. Readers can see Cudahy's inappropriate behavior and surmise abuse. After Holden tries to kiss her in the checker scene, Jane puts on a sweater as though she feels ashamed to show herself. She still enjoys Holden's company and appreciates his innocent attempt to comfort her, as his concern comes from a genuine place. She feels safe with him, and perhaps he is the only person in her life who is not out to take advantage of her. He doesn't make her feel vulnerable. But let's not lose sight of his misunderstanding. At no point did he come close to necking. While Holden is intelligent enough to suspect that something is clearly wrong with Jane's household, he is still too innocent to face a potentially ugly truth. He would rather focus on his attraction to his friend and recalls the situation in a romantic frame, a loving misunderstanding that tells us a lot about who he is. I hope I have enticed you to try this alternate approach if you are new to or rediscovering the novel. I promise that it's quite amazing if you do so, as you will discover several fascinating parallel narratives. Act like a detective. I would tell my students that I didn't really care whether or not they liked or related to a character. That's not necessarily educational. I urge them instead to withhold their judgment and practice being careful listeners and thinkers so that they might notice details that are easily missed by others. An astute reading of the novel, seeing it as a masterpiece of miscommunications and misunderstandings, will reward multiple readings. Other great situations in the narrative to try this out with include, but are not limited to, Holden's encounters with Sonny, Carl Luce, and Mr. Antolini. There's a lot more to the novel than most people realize. Now stay tuned for my piano rendition of Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe.